Thanks for coming out, everybody. We haven't chatted. I'll grab you after and talk a little bit, but I'm really hoping this is going to be a kind of getting to know who's in the room and what people are doing kind of in the Toronto area with Xamarin or with just mobile in general. I was talking to Alan here. Alan's heavily invested in Xamarin, and we're kind of talking about a lot of these user groups will just kind of talk about beginner stuff or focus specifically on .NET. I kind of want to break that mold. I want to really aim the group at more mobile in specific, instead of having it really focused on .NET or really focused on Xamarin in particular. You can certainly explore those subjects, but I think the mobile space is one that if you're not paying attention to everything that's going on around your app and the ecosystem, then you fall behind relatively quickly. So anyways, I'm going to jump into the presentation. This is more of a guide. So if you've got anything to add on anything, I'd love to hear what you're doing with some of these problems we're going to talk through in the next hour or so. So the objective for this group, like I said, would be to engage the mobile development community, facilitate some collaboration, get everybody kind of talking about what they're doing, share some ideas. I know every time I talk to mobile developers, I pick up a lot of different things. So just from having conversations, different tools that I wasn't aware of, or different approaches that they're taking that I might not have thought of. And that kind of leads into education, getting everybody educated on what's happening in the ecosystem, what's happening with the tools, and maybe some experimentation. So I'm hoping this kind of leads to a bit of a community where we can build things together, look at ways to solve problems together, and kind of try some different approaches. So I think one of the things we're going to do in kind of tackling these three items is present some solutions to some of the common tech problems, mobile tech problems. So user experience, which is I know is a huge one. If you go out there and use half your apps, don't have a very good flow through the app. Sometimes you get stuck where the app won't do something. You have to sit at a desktop and complete your task because the app simply doesn't have that functionality built in. Marketing and adoption, making sure that people will actually use your app once you've built it and they know it's there. That's a big one. Distribution. So distribution is interesting, particularly when you consider enterprise space. If you're pushing apps up to the App Store, that's kind of the mainstream. Sure, it's a publicly available app, but if you're working in an enterprise where the app should be used by internal employees, how are you pushing that out? How are you managing what's going to each device? And testing is always an interesting challenge. You've got some tools, some different approaches to take, exploring that kind of thing. So in terms of the audience, I'm pretty sure everybody here is leaning towards developers. So is there any non-developers in the room? Can I just see hands? Just a couple, okay. I think one of the things that kind of gets lost in this whole conversation is that developers are just like one piece of this. And sure, developers can wear multiple hats, but really, when we talk about things like testing and UX and marketing, distribution, that's much more than just a developer. The developer is building the app. In a lot of cases, there's going to be other players here. So if you're working in an enterprise where you need to distribute the app internally, you need IT guys. You need guys who are looking after your infrastructure, looking after the tooling that's being pushed out to different devices. You need to ensure that key stakeholders are up to speed with what's going on in mobile. They need to know what's involved. Quite often it's being kind of shoved into, oh yeah, we can just build this like we built things before. And that's not really the case with mobile. It changes. So it's not a web app where you just can, yeah, we can build this and then you kind of set it and deploy it and it just runs. Mobile changes fast. And if you're not on top of it, you end up with things like the LCBO app or the Go Transit app. Did anybody use one of those apps? So they're both they were abandonware. LCBO has picked up the ball, and rebuilt their app. But the Go Transit app was developed by Ryerson, and it's abandonware. So it's been pulled from the store because it doesn't work anymore. But they put all this effort into developing this product, and it sat and rotted, and it's gone. So there's all this upfront investment, and then it's just left to decay as the platform changed around it. Same thing with the LCBO app, and like I said, they kind of did a bit of a phoenix turn, and it's new again. But for a while, they had no app. So the motivation for this is mobile moves really fast. So like I said, if you're not keeping pace with everything that's going on, you're quickly left behind. If you're not like if you're developing an app that's an app and your business is built around your app, you're not paying attention to what's happening on the device with the operating systems, with the APIs. A competitor is going to come in, they're going to recognize that, hey, app X isn't taking advantage of all these features, and you'll get crushed because the other app will have all the bells and whistles that you don't. Really understanding what it takes to build, launch, and maintain an app. Like I said, really sticking with it through its full life cycle, but making sure the app doesn't just die. Facilitate collaboration and community. I kind of touched on that before. So really, there was no Xamarin community that I really knew of. There was a meetup, and it was dead. There hasn't been a meetup on it for.
I know that there's a big group from London.
In London, yeah. Yeah, the what do they call it?
There's one in
CTT, Canadian Technology Triangle, yeah. Yeah, and that's,
in Toronto, I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, there was one, and I think they had a couple meetups, and then it just kind of fell flat. So I'm kind of trying to pick up the torch and run with it, and facilitate this meeting and build a community here. So yeah, build that community and really share some ideas here. So like I said, every time we get together and talk about things like this, you kind of end up leapfrogging where you were before. And accelerate innovation in Toronto. I'm passionate about Toronto. I love it here. I love Toronto as a city. I love the community here. I love the people who live here. And there's a lot of brilliant people who live here. And really, we can learn from each other and get better at what we do and really accelerate that innovation. Okay, so this is some housekeeping stuff. There's a .NET developers group that is actually holding their meetup tonight. And that's the last Tuesday of every month. So I think what we're gonna do in future meetups is we're gonna use the third Tuesday of the month. Same time, same place, but third Tuesday of the month. So the next meetup would be tentatively scheduled for October 17th, right here, same time, same place. This is my call for speakers. If you want to present or know somebody who has skills to present and would like to present a technical topic, a marketing and adoption topic, or a usability topic, please let me know. I'll stand up here and present things on occasion, but I don't want to have to do it every single month. So as much help as I can get there would be greatly appreciated. And then how to kind of connect with us. So there's a Twitter account that I've put together. In that Twitter account, I've got a list. I don't know if anybody is a heavy Twitter user, but I know I am. And I've put together a list with a lot of prominent people in the Xamarin community, active people who are constantly tweeting and publishing things and putting code up on GitHub and talking about. There's a pretty good discussion on Twitter around Xamarin, and if you pay attention to that, it really helps you kind of keep up to date with what's going on. Of course, our Meetup page, and I've also put a GitHub page up there. So the GitHub page, I'm going to be posting this deck on there first, and that'll be the first thing that goes up there, but I'm hoping we can put code up there and share some projects up there and really use it as a center to connect around the community. So our sponsor tonight, who's provided the really nice venue, we were actually originally going to be up in a smaller room, and we managed to get a hold of this venue, and this room is really nice. So thanks to BSI Labs for the room and also the food they've provided. And BSI is a full-service enterprise mobile development shop. They're a Xamarin Premier Consulting Partner, and you can follow them on Twitter at BSI_labs. All right, so now kind of launching into the topic. So today's topic is really meant to facilitate a discussion, a group discussion, and get to know what everybody wants to get out of this meetup, and kind of cover some background and some issues around why we are where we are, how to solve some of those, and some next steps. First, a little bit about me. I'm a developer with 17 years of experience. Right now I'm doing mobile at BSI Labs. I'm Xamarin certified, and I've been working with Xamarin for 3 years, and I know there's people in this room that already have me beat quite a bit. So it's good. That means I have people who I can learn from. I refer to myself as a genetically predisposed programmer. I've got really thick glasses, and so I've got a nice glasses emoji that's a little washed out down in the corner. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dylan Berry. So some background, where are we now? So technology in Canadian business is a very interesting landscape. If you kind of look around the world, and particularly at our neighbor to the south, we're quite a bit behind of a lot of other countries, a lot of the United States in particular. Canadian business tends to be relatively conservative around technology, don't want to take on too much risk and break what's already working. So we end up being relatively slow to adapt, slow to change. We're pretty far behind in mobile tech in particular. Things that were mobile friendly and released in app form in the States years ago are just now coming to the forefront in Canada. So just a bit of a glacial pace here. There's a lot fewer startups, and from what I found out there, startups in Canada tend to be funded more at the infancy stage, whereas in other countries, particularly the United States, infancy is people are expected to bootstrap their businesses, and then they'll get funded later when they have something viable. But in Canada, it tends to be at the earlier stage. So kind of at a glance here, I went in search of where we actually rank from a technology point of view on the global stage. And if you look at the IDI ranking, so that's Information and Communication Technology Development Index. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. That's put out by the World Economic Fund, or one of those organizations. I've got a footnote in here. You can actually take a look through the numbers. So I've kind of outlined two numbers here. It's a little washed out, but our rank is falling on the world stage in terms of technology in the developed countries. So our value's gone up. So we've gone from a previous 2015 value of 7.55 and now at 7.62, which is relatively arbitrary, but our value is going up at a much slower rate as other countries. So I think it was in 2012, we were ranked number 8, and now we're at number 25. So we're actually falling behind. So there needs to be some focus on how can we catch up, how can we actually stay at the forefront of technology and not fall further behind. So Toronto is a great starting point. Toronto is the largest business center in Canada. Toronto is the financial hub of Canada. Most of the corporate offices are based here. And there's a bit of a startup culture that's starting, like particularly in this neighborhood, there seems to be a little bit of startup culture. And I know there's other areas too, like Markham's got a pretty decent startup culture, and Mississauga as well. But it's starting. You can kind of feel it. You see some activity. people are starting to kind of get it that we need to pay attention to this or we're going to get left behind. So the developer landscape is another kind of issue. There seems to be a bit of a skills gap where there's a bunch of developers out there, but they can't necessarily do what's being asked of them. And that's for a variety of reasons, and there's a lot going on in the mobile space. So information overload is kind of one of those things where, you know, there's so much happening. What do you focus on? I know a lot of the times I run into this where it's, what do I look at? iOS 11 comes out and Android 0, like both in the same month. Do I just kind of skim both of them? Do I do a deep dive in one? What about the iPhone 10? What's all those different things at play? There tends to be a focus of keeping the lights on. So I know everybody's day-to-day jobs tend to be quite full with just keeping things running and just keeping the day-to-day going. The term agile, which can be helpful for developers, tends to be pretty abused. I've heard some interesting terms. One of my peers threw out the term flaccid agile, which, yeah, I can see why you call it that. It tends to be one of those words that people treat like a magic potion that you can just like throw on a problem and it fixes it. And if anybody's been involved in an agile project that isn't really agile, it actually tends to make things a little worse. And the demand for skills outstrip the supply. And I found a stat that said there's 182,000 IT jobs that will be unfilled by 2020. So there's a lot of demand for developers. So how do we keep up with that? How do we make sure that we're honing our skills and actually remaining on top of things and trying to advance things from a technology point of view? So why is Canada behind in technology? I covered a little bit of it, but let's kind of dive into that and explore it a little further. So technology is hard. We all know this. We've all worked in technology, or we all work in technology. Everybody here tends to be a developer. We have to deal with business problems. There's often people problems at play. And of course, technology in itself, like the innate nature of technology is it's complex. There's lots of moving parts and it changes fast. There's external factors that lean on it. There's all kinds of things at play that make it really difficult to make things work smoothly all the time in technology. And so if technology is hard, mobile technology is really hard. The devices, just if you look at the devices, I don't know, just quick show of hands, who has looked at the developer guideline for the iPhone 10? And any thoughts on that?
It says like stay away from the top here, the bottom.
Yeah.
There's like a page above nothing.
Right. And watch the video and things that should be trivial, like the striping on like a list view, like the zebra striping. It stops working at the edge where you're supposed to not build things at the edge. It's a different color. The striping is a different color because the way it's been built wasn't to the exact best practice that was released probably before the thing was, or after the app was actually built to begin with. So things like that kind of at play where you don't have a lot of control of what's going on. The ecosystem changes around you and you go, oh, I need to adapt to this really quick. So the device shape is different now. So that's another thing we have to tango with. So we've got fragmentation of it on Android, and on iOS, we've now got a different screen size to deal with, along with, you know, there's a little bit of fragmentation going on that platform at this point now too. What's that? Yeah, the notch. Notch. There's now a notch in the screen. Different size and shape of screen. So stores and distribution tend to be a pain point, particularly with Apple. particularly when Apple decides to release a update to iOS or a new device right as you're trying to launch. Has anybody had experience getting caught in a long queue because of iOS updates coming through? People updating their apps? I got first-hand experience with this, and it was not fun. Stakeholders expected the app. We pushed the app. Why isn't it out? Why don't we have the new app? Well, there's a 3-week queue right now. So we have to wait for that queue to clear and our turn to come up, and then the app. So the stores are one thing. If you're doing, like I said, enterprise distribution, it becomes another issue altogether. How do you manage that? How do you, are you using an MDM package? Are you trying to use something more ad hoc? Do you have an Apple Enterprise license so you can actually manage your own releases? Testing, again, going back to the devices. Devices are hard to manage in. Well, there's so many different devices. How do you test against everything? We know there's tools out there. The tools only get you so far. You actually have to get the app in the field or in people's hands to really know what it's going to behave like on that device. Your test cases are never going to be 100% coverage. So you actually have to get it into the user's hands to see how it's going to behave. How do you manage that? How do you manage the feedback from all that? So the app's out there and it's live. How are you managing the feedback? So if your app goes out and you get 100,000 downloads in the first week, it's like drinking from a fire hose. How do you sort through that information? If the app is reporting back metrics to a central repository where you can sort through it, how do you weed through that data? Are you using an external package? Or are you doing it customized? Are you really getting the data you want to get? Are you getting your full crash reports? So there's a lot of things to consider just on that point alone. And like I said, it's ongoing. It's different from the web because things are changing around you. The web is mature. The web, when it changes, it doesn't break what was already there. It might look big. There might be things that are slightly askew, but it doesn't fundamentally break what's there. You don't have the LCBO site not work anymore. You don't have the Go site just stop working because the browser updates have outpaced it and there's no longer, it doesn't work anymore. So it's a lot different. And I think that's one of the challenges is really because web is so mature at this point, everybody expects apps to behave like the web and they don't, not even close. So some of the challenges, the tech giants are slow to roll out to the Canadian market, which we're all pretty aware of. We're in Toronto, so we tend to get some things early in some cases, but in general, we're behind. I know for cloud, this was a big problem for a long time because of Canadian privacy laws. You had to have your data center on Canadian soil and it had to be physically inspected by somebody from IT, InfoSec. Has to go and inspect the co-located data center. So for a long time, Canada could even consider cloud in a lot of different industries. That's changed a lot now, and I know Google announced a data center in May of this year, and actually Visual Studio announced that they have a data center on Canadian soil, and that was just last week. That was on the 22nd. So that was a bit of a blocker. So just the fact that, you can't get some of those bits of latest technology, you can't even get access to them in Canada right when they're released is an issue. And the devices too. The devices were always behind. This is particularly with Android. Apple tends to be a little more level set. But with Android, a lot of the devices, we don't get them for 2, 3, 4 months after they've hit the States. What's the latest LG? It's the V22? What's that? V30. The V30. It's been out in the States for 6 months. And we're just getting it this month, I believe, right? We're getting it in October. So just an example of how we kind of are behind the 8 ball. We're starting from a disadvantaged position. So I think that lends itself to us having to actually pay more attention to this stuff and really stay on top of things. So even more challenges. So coming down to, we talked about the web a little bit and how people treat mobile like we treat the web, but it's different. But you still can't leave web out of the equation. If you're building a business around a mobile app, people are going to want to expect to sit at their desk and do the same task that they can on their phone. I know for me, when I'm sitting in front of a keyboard with a large screen, I don't want to have to take my phone out of my pocket to complete a task. When I have a full keyboard that I can easily type on, and a nice mouse, and a nice, you know, a big setup that works and I'm very comfortable with, I don't want to have to context switch and get something out of my pocket. So that mobile first kind of misnomer, I'd say. So making sure that you've got parity across the platforms, which your target users are going to pay attention to. So, and then paying attention to your technical constraints. So in mobile, of course, you've got the case of network availability. So what happens when your network dies? Does your app support offline? Does it not work offline at all? Does it partially work offline? What are you doing offline? The device and platform capabilities. We talked about fragmentation. Further to that, you have things like iBeacon and Eddystone, where it's almost like different fragmentation, where Eddystone is not quite native. It's not quite native on Android or iOS, yet iBeacon behaves completely different. So how do you handle those two scenarios? How do you build for both of those? And battery usage. This one is basically, I put this in here because my phone doesn't last longer than 7 hours at the absolute best case scenario at this point. I got Nexus 6P and it's like Warren, and got the battery drop off issue, and it's a pain. So battery usage is another thing. So if your apps, if a user goes into their battery settings and sees that your app is using all their battery, they're going to uninstall your app. So another set of challenges would be cost. Mobile apps tend to be pretty expensive, particularly compared to their web counterpart. Now you get a lot back in return because it's more engaged and you've got something like really fast, slick, and suited to their device in their hand, which is amazing. But it's not free. It comes at a price. We talked about developer competency. People coming from the web. I came from web and moved to mobile, and it's a big shift. It's a big paradigm shift. You have to really understand what's going on. You can't just slap the same patterns. You can't be sloppy on mobile. There's no room for it, because you get back into some of the issues we talked about last slide, where it's draining battery, or it doesn't work offline, it just crashes all the time. So that becomes an issue, and a lack of stakeholder understanding. Like that web comparison keeps coming back up. Because it's true, people go, well, this would have cost X amount of dollars if I just built a website. Why is the app so much more expensive? And that leads to this next slide. And I took this slide, I lost the footnote. Oh, it's from Kinvey. I've got this link to this, and there's a whole article on this in the resources. So if you grab the slide deck later, you can kind of see it. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit, not deal into it, but basically for an MVP, so minimum viable product, it's going to take you 18 weeks total to deliver a minimum viable product. And that's just developers touching. This is what the developers do. This isn't necessarily any of your discovery, any user interviews, any marketing or studies to actually see if you're pointed in the right direction. So it's a big task. And of course, we get into this nice triangle, which I'm sure everybody's seen before. Pick two, right? So is it going to be fast and good, or good and cheap? You know the whole deal. And how do you balance that? How do you really make sure that you're maximizing what you're putting into this? So let's talk about some of the solutions. So I don't know if anybody's seen this before. Any Silicon Valley fans? Yeah, no. So I'll be Jack Barker for the rest of the presentation. So yeah, jokes aside, how do you move forward with some of these, like solving some of these problems? How do you solve for some of these like really big and complex issues? How do you get things moving? So I tend to be a big believer in culture. I think a lot of this is culturally driven. Canada's culture actually lends itself to putting us in a position where we are today, where we're behind because of that conservative nature. So I think trying to build a culture of trust, open communication, with a focus on continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is a big one. I see far too often where things just die. Whereas, you know, if they had a very minimal amount of time and attention, you know, once a week, you go in and you work half a day on X, so it doesn't die. Just keep it alive. The LCBO app, I'm going to keep using and harping on this example because it's a great one. They spend a bunch of money and then it died. But if they just had one developer sitting there looking at this app, mobile developer, paying attention to the API changes, pushing tests out to a few small group of testers just to keep up with the API, they wouldn't have had to rebuild it. And then at a certain point, they would have went, oh, the app's not looking as good as it does compared to the others. Let's put a facelift on it. Instead, they tore the whole thing down and rebuilt it from scratch. So it's kind of funny. Continuous improvement is a big one. Education is key, particularly in this field. Everything moves so fast if you don't pay attention. I'm going to kind of, Twitter is basically a really good source of information. So if you're not on Twitter, kind of paying attention to the mobile community on Twitter, should. It's excellent. And the culture of winning as a team, I think that one's pretty key too. Particularly in mobile, when you've got different stakeholders involved. You've got, like I said, marketing, and you've got UX people, and you've got the IT guy who's taking care of distribution. So you've got a lot of players, and making sure that everybody's kind of pushing for the same goal, and they're all coordinating and all pulling in the same direction. It's important. So there's some processes that can help you. We talked about feedback. So feedback loops are really important in app development in particular. When you have these challenges that we're dealing with, you have to make sure that you're really paying attention to what your users are saying, to what your logs are saying. You have to stay on top of that. We now have the ability to respond to iOS ratings and reviews, which is excellent. So you can actually engage your user base and go up there and talk to them about the problems they're having. There's lots of cases I've come across where I've been completely unable to replicate the issues that the users have been having. And once you engage in a conversation, you can actually figure out what's going on their end and solve the problem. And then sometimes you even find that it wasn't just one user, it was actually 1,000 users impacted by this, but there's one focal. So making sure that you've got that ability for the users to give you feedback and a way for you, a mechanism for you to respond. If you've ever used Hockey App, Hockey App has tooling that you can put in your app, embed in your app, so you can actually have chat-like functionality. It works like a little mini threaded conversation right from within your app. And I found that pretty useful, particularly during test cycles where you've got users that are really engaged and they really want to give you feedback. They'll give you feedback, it'll be constructive, you can work through problems, you can take screenshots, things like that. The DevOps portion is always important, making sure you can push builds out without putting 6 hours into the build process. Having things flow easily out to your test devices, out to your test users. Very key. That comes back to shortening that feedback loop. So if I can make a change and get it out to my users in less than 20 minutes, and then they can reply and say, hey, that fixed my issue. That's way better than, or that didn't fix my issue. That's way better than it taking weeks or months or days or whatever it be. Which is again, the iOS approval process kind of provides some barriers to that. But if you're using test flight and things like that, you can kind of work around them with it or within them, or other distribution tools such as Hardware. And Agile. So I talk about feedback loops. Short feedback loops are kind of one of the fundamental pieces of Agile. They're important. So the sooner you can get feedback from a change you've made or something you've done, the more effective that information is going to be. So there's some tools out there, various frameworks that can help you kind of move things in the right direction and simplify what you're doing. There's some that can hurt you too, so just be aware of it. Make sure you do your homework before you invest in a framework. Build POCs. Talked about DevOps, so a big piece of that is continuous integration, continuous deployment. Being able to push a button and have code ship is key. I think anybody who's done the opposite kind of knows as soon as they see the continuous integration, continuous deployment lifecycle and see it go out with one click of a button, you're like, oh wow, I automate everybody else's business practices. Why don't I automate my own and kind of use your own technology to solve your tech problems or your business problems? Cloud services can get you a long way. I tend to use a few different ones. Again, make sure you do your homework on these because sometimes they can bite you more than they help. So being able to influence is key too, and getting your stakeholders involved, and making sure that they're part of the conversation before you build an app, because it's not the web. It's much different from the web. It's going to take a lot more effort up front. It's going to take more ongoing effort, and you have to make sure that they're aware of that, and it's still going to pay off in the end. So having that conversation, selling your vision is going to be a key part of the conversation, and a key part of what needs to happen before you can actually successfully start building it. I talked a little bit about funding earlier, but this is some detail on it. So the average business app, and this is like an enterprise app, I built this from a variety of sources. There's a primary source at the bottom here, but they cost $250,000 to build, so it's not cheap by any means, and that's like really taking into consideration all the pieces that are moving, all the work that needs to be done to actually get the app to market, and I'm sure like a maintenance cycle and things like that. So not cheap. Again, this tends to be a bit of an arbitrary number, but I've seen this tossed around in other scenarios, in other settings too, and I've seen some apps take a long time, a lot of budget to get out the door too. So take it with a grain of salt, but that's what it is. So I looked up I found some really interesting information on where the mobile economy or the app economy is getting funding from to start up. And in Canada, less than 6% of the apps are VC funded. So that's a really small number. So if you're going out there and you're planning on building an app and you're going to get VC funding, you might want to rethink that, because it doesn't really happen here. You'd be the very small minority, and like I said, in Canada, it tends to be a little slanted towards when you're very, like, your infancy, rather than if you have a fully developed product that you're taking to VC to get funding. So it's a little different here. And most apps are funded out of pocket by companies and individuals. So most apps are just going to be, maybe we've got this business over here and we're going to build an app to drive more sales or drive more marketing, or whatever it may be. So it's different, and I think that really needs to be considered if you're building an app as a standalone business. That there isn't going to be those angel investors in Canada that will seed your, help you start up, basically. Okay, so this is pretty much getting to the end here. And I'm really hoping we can have some like further conversation, like once I've got through these next pieces, because I'm always interested to hear what other people are doing and what challenges they're facing. So I say, know thyself. Really make sure you understand your needs. There's the whole app spectrum, if you've ever heard of that, where it kind of comes from on your one side you've got native app, on the other side you've got like a mobile friendly site. There's some areas in between. So you've got like a hybrid app and a REST web app and a mobile friendly site and a responsive site. So you want to make sure you're targeting the right thing. You don't want to build an app when a responsive site do. So making sure that you're right sizing things to ensure that you're going to have a high level of success and your stakeholders are going to be happy and your users are going to be happy. Know when to ask for help. So there's a decent community out there for mobile. People are passionate. They want to help. They want to engage. And there's lots of resources out there. Training is always important. Trying to stay, instead of reacting to these problems that are coming at you, trying to stay a little bit ahead of it. You're not always going to get it right every time, tackle the right technology, but if you can spend some time every week, every month, carve out some time and hone your skills and develop your skills before the problems come at you, it's always a better way of doing things. You end up making far less mistakes and pointing yourself in the right direction. And there's consultants out there. If you need help, consultants are always a good resource. I became a consultant because I liked working with consultants. When I used to work for the banks, and consultants would come in and cut through all the crap, and things would work a lot better. So communication is a big piece. Make sure you're talking to your target users. I've got a resource on the next slide. It's about working with your users to develop your product, not like making assumptions about what's going to happen, but actually engaging your users, making sure that you're interviewing them, that you're sitting down with them, talking with them, getting them the product in their hand as quickly as you can, like at the very earliest stages, and making sure that they're going to get what they want, and making sure you're actually solving for the right set of problems by communicating. And stakeholders and executives, I've touched on this a couple different times, but it's really important that they understand that this is not the web, that this is going to take a lot more than a traditional web app would take if you're going a native route. And they need to understand that, and they need to make sure that everything's managed with those set of expectations. That you have the right team, that you have the right set of funds, that you have the right timelines, so you're not starting from a position where you're already behind the eight ball. I've got some resources here. I kind of talked about the mobile app spectrum. The one infographic that I had in one slide is up there. It's a really interesting one. That's a good one to show to executives because they can really see all the different little pieces that you have to put together just as a dev team, just as a delivery team to ship an app. So it's a really good 10,000 foot view with like some nice drill downs on what it takes. There's some stats out here, costs of custom mobile business app development, where they've surveyed a large variety of people and companies on what did it take to actually get your app to market. And there's some really interesting stuff in there, and I really would, if you're coming at it from this point of view where you're developing a business app, it's really interesting to look at how much other companies are spending on their apps and what it's taking for them to deliver things. It's fascinating, really. From a startup point of view, there are some interesting resources out there on Mars DD on how to fund a startup. This is not a startup meetup, but it's relevant information, and it's, at the very least, it's interesting. So they've got this whole list of resources on different VCs, and once again, it's like a little bit of a interesting one to take a run at, because, like I said, 6%, less than 6% to get funded by startup. But there's some resources there nonetheless. There's government grants and all kinds of things you look into. And then I kind of talked about this on the last slide, co-creating, designing with the user for the user. So it's that whole practice of getting your users at the table when you're building. So right at the construction phase, almost having users as part of your delivery team to make sure that what you're building is going to be solving for the right set of problems. And last, thank you. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate you coming up to this. I'd like to thank BSI Labs again and Brightline for the great venue. There's a couple of MVPs out there that gave me some help to get this off the ground. Dave Lloyd, Alan Ritchie, who's here today, and Laura Lalonde, who runs the CTT group out in Western Ontario. So that's all I've got. I'm hoping we can kind of continue this discussion and talk about some of the things that everyone has run into when they've been building apps, because I think, Scott, I talked to you a little bit about your developing apps. You've done those different things, and I've got some experience. I don't know if you guys have anything to add, but I know it's a challenging landscape, so anytime we can kind of share our experiences and put our heads together on how we solve these problems is always valuable. Yeah, I guess that would be important. So we've got developers primarily. Is there anything that, any pertinent topics that you would like to see covered? And we kicked around a couple ideas.
I think one of the big things right now is kind of focus on UIs, experience, stuff like these stuff, so I'm not writing going forward all day.
Yeah, sensors and getting around the text input.
IoT topics right now, ones that are often not addressed.
Yep.
Generally, IoT is basically leadership to the cloud, that's often those topics are.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. IoT and like I said, iBeacon and Eddystone are pretty fascinating technologies. What you can do with that stuff is pretty cool. Like micro triangulation and things like that. What's that? Don't use Eddystone? I kind of figured that was the case after having a look at it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah, you have to have Chrome right in the forefront, right? If you're using Eddystone on iOS. Yeah. Interesting. Any other suggestions on what to cover? I know who's so is everybody kind of working with Xamarin? Like anybody not working with Xamarin, I guess? Be a better way to frame this. Couple. Okay. So, like I said, this is going to be mobile-centric with a slant towards Xamarin. So I think the technical topics that we cover would be Xamarin, but the non-technical topics are pretty much agnostic to the platform. I know we've got a really bright UX person at BSI Labs, and I've been asking her to come and present in the next couple of months. And she tends to be a difference maker on a project, really. So you add her to the equation. Yeah, her UX magic actually. And like she's got more skills than that, really, how to manage that whole process of building something really high quality. Is that interesting to people? Is that something that would be helpful? Okay.
Actually, I have been looking for topics on UI and UX. I find that very challenging, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, I've been trying to get more information on that. Actually, more of like sources of inspiration. You know?
Yeah.
How to get inspired to build a pretty and you know, well built UI for
There's been a bunch of activity on Twitter of people who are duplicating really mainstream apps
Netflix,
and Xamarin Forms. That's really cool. I like that whole approach. I kind of thought about doing that, never got around to it. So it's nice to see somebody else is doing it. Yeah, it's good to see that. Particularly with Xamarin Forms these days, you can pretty much make the UI look however you want. So that's interesting. Yeah, UI stuff is always a challenge, particularly for like tech people, right? I know that's not my primary set of skills. So every time I get put into that box, even if it's small things, it becomes a lot more difficult for me to actually put something that looks good and works really in a polished way, I guess, compared to if I have a UX person or a designer like helping me through the process.
Talking about yourself, about maybe bring yourself to the Xamarin team out there to talk about your Xamarin, what's kind of future.
Yeah, I like that. Alan kind of talked about Xamarin Forms 3 coming out. Who's going to ask me soon? Who's going to ask me first about that? And yeah, that's a big topic because a lot's changing in Xamarin Forms 3, like from the ground up. So I think it's even bigger change from 1x to 2x. Right. Yeah. Yeah, a lot fewer layers to actually hit the UI, things like that.
Very fast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
He lives in Kansas, I think, right?
Yeah, no, he lives in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. Yeah, getting some heavy hitters up here. Alan's a pretty heavy hitter. So, Alan, if you want to give your Bluetooth beacon,
As long as it's not in Xamarin Forms.
doesn't have to be Xamarin Forms. Yeah, it's always interesting too. Like I think one of the ones that one of the talks I'll be giving in the future is particularly since I've been really working with it a lot is some of the offline sync tools. There's things out there like the Azure mobile offline sync and Realm. Yeah, what did you think of it?
It can be trouble because you're completely tied up to the way they have to set up your tables. You know.
Yeah.
You have to have
table data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had trouble with it.
Yeah. And then
and your API controllers have to be tied to their unit packages, you know?
Yeah.
So you actually all of the classes on your API, they have to
if you take just the interface, though, if you take just the interface,
can you?
take properties. It's not ideal. And you're supposed to start with the authentication.
Yeah.
Most things, batteries, taking everything.
Yeah, the other thing, Azure, the B2C flows that you have to use the web view still. That one drives me crazy. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff around like some of the cloud services that there's lots to explore. Offline sync is one of the big ones. I talked about, you know, if you don't have a network connection, what do you do? Right. I think gets overlooked a lot of the time. And I like to try and architect things from an offline first point of view. So making it work offline before I even have it hitting anything in the cloud. It's not always easy.
I'd be interested to see how maybe like how that gets built and then how it's set.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you like, well, more like this future, yeah, that should change, right? That's what they build your UI test with it. It's almost like constant updating, at least from like what, my background is web before it's what I designed, so doing like automated UI tests in Visual Studio, like web tests, like we call it. Yeah, anything you change, it's like now the form doesn't submit enough input fields, and then the request is broken, the server just craps out, it's this problem, you say it's just like that. You have to deal with this all the time. Literally any user on the whole day, yes, yes. Well, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, if you're using the automation IDs, right? If you build it with testability in mind, it becomes, yeah, it's easy. If you build it, if you do that after the fact, it's a lot of going through, adding automation IDs, or scouring through the tree to figure out where certain UI elements are. Of course, but the payoff, right? It's the using the 80-20 principle to solve that one. I think is always a good way to, like, people who strive for that 100% test coverage. I think that kind of tends to be yeah, exactly. It never happens, and if it does, it's like faked. I've seen people who brag about their 100% test coverage, and then you're like, well, what about this test? What was that actually?
You're not going to do the testing.
You can't. You can't. Yeah. And that's like, yeah, getting the device actually on it, or getting your product and physical device and actually testing it with different things. You're going to get real life results that aren't going to mirror anything you can do in a test harness. Unless you get a hardware test harness. Automate a whole factory just to test Bluetooth beacons.
We have 5,000 people just walking the floors and seeing what we're seeing. It was about 2 weeks of testing with like 20 people walking up and down.
Yeah, that's wild. Very different. So, anything else that anybody would like to see? What about like architecture patterns, or I guess with the 2 OS updates coming out, it'd probably be a good idea to keep on top of that stuff. Although by the time we get into next month, you should probably be better off just picking up the podcast. And there's a couple out there that do the recaps of the updates. Yeah, Merge Conflict, James Montemagno's podcast. Yeah, I enjoyed their take on Android.
I like to have notes from
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. So when that happens, we'll try and make sure we're planning ahead for those and saving time. So when those OS updates come out, we cover them right away and really show some of the differences. I think I'll probably take those ones on. Anything else that anybody would like to see in future meetups? Anybody want to call out like the biggest problem that they've had with mobile development? Like their #1 stumbling block that they found? Right.
Essentially, that's just one product. Supports, let's say, 10 configurations to 10 customers. That's all one first quote.
Right.
So, one client doesn't need this feature, but this one has it because some other client does.
Right.
So, I'm over there to use, I guess, and build like to services, small notion packages that put in
Right.
Make a copy of each product, or shared services. So,
what I would want to do, ideally what I want is each customer has their own source. Repository, like all stuff that is shared is like, something that they'll share, and then if one customer needs it, want to tap page, so that for example, offloading all that into or not pages
I'll be honest, some of you have the right idea right now, so you just feature flagging stuff on and off.
Yeah.
Your product is easy to test. Yeah. Like what you have now.
but that's not what we have now.
Oh, it's all right.
That's what you're driving towards.
Not JSON necessarily.
We do, yeah, we do that. And that's technically more customer source code. And they don't get these, for example, but it's probably not. So they have that library in there.
If it's not used, it's not violating.
No, it's close.
Right. So you've got assemblies that are shipped with that particular customer that you don't even use.
There's like
Interesting.
very slowly comes up like I was as issues peripheral issues like computers and stuff like that. But it's all very complicated. But also when we fix that, because it applies to customer A, it's technically modified like this was code for
Right.
Whereas it's structured configuration.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah. Yeah, because like you said, the feature flagging, Alan, that's, yeah. But then as soon as you've got bloat in the code, because.
That's easy to question. Like in this scenario, I don't have credit card. Yeah, right now, say what I want to send. I'm selling out it, so allowed to use your link for something.
Yeah, permissions is another thing. Yeah. So dynamically.
Right, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the more on demand driven. Yeah, that one's interesting. Feature flags are, that's like a step beyond feature flags. That's like assembly flags.
But like some like there's good service. So task that will like sort of good nights, for example.
Right, I see. Yeah, yeah. So then build it with that different packages, .json or packages XML file, restores what you need. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Anyone else? Single biggest obstacle? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one. Particularly since, most phones are like several versions behind the latest OS release at this point. So,
Yeah, they're generally APIs.
oh, yeah. I used to, exactly. I used to be a big Android fan until I started doing a lot more mobile dev. Now I just despise both platforms. So that's interesting. Well, yeah, back to Windows Phone. I was never on Windows Phone. I'm no fool. It's more like back to iPhone, I think. What are other things? What about collecting user feedback? How are people finding that? So trying to get users trying to nip problems in the bud before users make a bad review. Anybody had experience with that? Like trying to figure out what's causing them problems before solve it proactively rather than responding to some bad reviews in the App Store. Yeah, Raygun, or I used Xamarin and Azure for a while. Used Housekeeping for a while. Anything. I know there's lots of different packages out there. No, nobody's really doing that. Oh yeah. Pretty much have to. I put it in from day one, personally. I actually now I bundle it into a separate service so I can swap it out. I don't like the way it's doing something. Yeah, exactly. Now it's mobile center, which doesn't do half the things that Insights Hockey app used to do. But you can build on a Mac in the cloud. Okay. It's all right, I guess. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm doing almost consistently, just because that customization, right? Anytime you lose that control, it's like, yeah, the CI pipeline is interesting. Particularly VSTS is now, I guess you could call it mature. So really, I rarely run into problems with like Vaseline being broken, any of that kind of stuff. But before Fastlane, I had my own shell scripts that would push stuff into test cloud. So it's nice to not have to maintain that stuff anymore. Is anybody using something else, something other than VSTS to manage their pipeline? Alan, I know you said you guys, your team's sitting in GitHub. What do you find What do you find is stronger in those products over VSTS? Yeah, I've been with it forever. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Right, like Bitbucket. Yeah, you have to build your own pieces. Yeah, but it's lagged, right? So it's there now, but when you needed it, it wasn't there. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I remember having to get I had to get a bunch of domain admin account so I could provision VMs on the fly for one of that. For what was that? Can't remember the name of the module, but that was it. Yeah, it was the Hyper-V manager or whatever. So you could. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah. Are you guys using?
We are building the ticketing app for Meetups.
Okay.
We're using a framework that is being built by a company called Nontechnical. It's built on top of Xamarin.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are working on our Xamarin certifications. He already got this. I'm working on mine. I got the mobile professional one.
Nice.
So now we're working a lot with this framework that chose to build their app on.
Interesting.
But we're always working, doing our stuff on the side.
Right.
So I've been using Xamarin Classic mostly.
Yeah.
For the past year and a half.
Right.
I do some like contractor's job on the side, and yeah, I built a couple of apps on Xamarin apps. So I bet.
Nice.
Maybe we could discuss also some tools that people like to use.
Yeah.
What plugin or what tool helped you a lot in the project you were working on?
I think yeah, that's a very valid point. So I know there's a whole pile of plugins floating around out there.
There's a couple of lists that you can find online.
I like, if I'm working on forms, I like Prism. Yeah. It's nice, particularly since right now I'm working on a project that uses a very half-baked MVM light. I don't even know why it's there really, but it's there, and I want to scrap it and throw in Prism because I had a good experience with Prism. I like that one. MVP Cross is awesome for. Yeah, I find reactive UI, you can tie yourself in knots pretty quickly. I've seen some interesting things with it. So that's one of the ones where I'd say, yeah, make sure you really know it before you use it, really know and understand it. So I've seen some interesting pieces of code with that. Right? Yeah.
There, we mentioned that likes to use a lot of service locators.
Yeah.
Depending on the area you're coming from, generally people don't like service locators. And I'm not a fan of it. I usually like the structure.
Yeah, I like dependency injection too.
What was the reaction?
Yeah. For dependency injection, I tend to lean towards Autofac. I like Unity because it bundles nicely with Prism, but Autofac tends to be, the tooling tends to be better and you can use it across multiple platforms. It just has a little bit more to it. It's a little bit more robust. It's just my take. Take or leave it. You like Autofac too? Yeah, Unity's okay. Unity gets the job done. It just doesn't have the tooling. It's just not as robust. It's not quite there. A lot of different areas. Yeah. And then of course all the plugins that get you the platform-specific stuff. That's always helpful.
You were saying that you don't like forms much?
It's not that I don't like forms. So, as its place.
You can get yourself into trouble with forms. Like if you don't know how the underlying platforms work, you can build code that performs really poorly. I know my first couple kickset forms were terrible because, like I said, I came from web, didn't know what I was doing, and built apps that performed poorly because I built them like a web app largely. And it's fine on a big server cluster or wherever running. It's not fine on a device that's got a 300 or 3,000 milliamp hour battery, right? It's crush it. So, yeah, I think forms definitely has its place. Like Alan said, I think if you really know what you're doing, you can make forms dance pretty well. But there's still a place for both, for sure. Particularly if you're really leaning towards having like a very iOS feel to your UI or very Android feel. You really want it to feel like really, really, really native and have different looks on each platform, right? comes to a point where if you start building a ton of renders, like, you're probably better off just building a native image platform.
Classic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What I don't like about performance is that rendering everything runs in simultaneous.
Pardon me?
Everything runs in simultaneous. Rendering.
Yeah.
One activity.
One activity, yeah.
Even to do stuff.
Yes.
Resources and it's actually not entirely true. The receptions that actually instantiates your shifting application actually uses writing tricks as well. There is a lot of tricks that we do with it. When you run it, and main activity is behind the scenes, they actually keep your navigation service. Yes, if you use an application change, but you use those pages and push them in more. You have to know what you're doing. How are you pushing that navigation? Just for example, push a page. Okay. Doesn't get it. Okay. That's most people just use. You use a native page. Well, that's actually but try it on performance. It's not the same. You actually create your own.
I find that, like, you start talking about some of those lower level functionalities too, like Bluetooth. Anytime you're doing anything like that, or anything that needs to run in the background, you end up writing so much platform specific code anyways that probably better off. Depends on what it is, right? Depends on what it is. Yeah, I've got an app that's got like this big background component. I built that classic purpose. Xamarin and Azure. If I looked at, I took one stab at refactoring it in forms, and I'm like, why would I do this? And just like doing more work, just abandoned it, ditched it. It's always interesting to see the contrast of.
Do you guys think it's going to change in the next series?
Not that much.
Not that much on that.
They got a perception that's fast changes and fast renders and all the games coming there. So they're targeting more platforms and solidify all the bugs that they have right now. That's the target. They're not aiming at it like in future. They're after what's
Right, yeah. I see some activity around that. It's interesting to me too, that the WebAssembly, because I often get the question, is there code, can I share my front end code from Xamarin to web? Can I have my validation logic? Like, I take that same code and I go like, well, no, can't write C# on the web. So you got to find another way to do it. And I've seen some things where you build some validation engines that you build your rules like in a declarative fashion, and then it generates JavaScript, TypeScript, or C# validation classes. That's kind of interesting. Yeah. But there's no true code sharing really from a front end. So WebAssembly, I think, is something to keep an eye on. How fast that's really moved. It's baked into Chrome and Firefox at this point. And Edge, yeah. I played with it a little bit. It seems interesting. I wouldn't invest in it yet because we all know how these technologies tend to go. So like DirectX, Flash, those heavy, thicker technologies on the website. Web, like I said, web's so well established and mature. It's like be interesting to see if it actually shifts that direction. Yeah. If I don't have to write JavaScript again, yeah, I can put a lot of positive thought towards that. I'm a big fan. Anything else anyone wants to touch on today? Was this valuable? I know I just like kind of blah, 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 like, but kind of, I know a lot of people here have already seen this and been through these trials and tribulations of trying to get an app together and ship it. So this is probably stuff you already know and hate. Anyways, I'll send a SurveyMonkey survey to get some feedback. So that'll be good. And tell me this was a waste of my time or not. And we'll get more technical next time and keep it more technical. So now that I know that everybody wants to talk tech, it's great. Talk tech. We'll just get right into demo land and build some stuff instead of me up here, blah blah, making you fall asleep. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.